I think every single clinician in the country, if you want to provide the best quality care possible, you have to have exceptional communication skills. Otherwise, the patient will not understand what you're about, and it'll be very difficult for you to progress as a clinician, in my opinion, because the best dentists I've also seen just happen to be the best communicators. I don't think that's a coincidence. There's a clear causal relationship to be investigated there. I think the communication is non-negotiable, and I strongly believe that every single clinician, when they graduate, should have a strong basis in their clinical competence.
Most dentists aren't trained to run businesses, let alone scale them. This is the TechDental Podcast for dental leaders who want more than just tips. We give you systems, strategies, and straight answers. I'm Dr. Randeep, and each week I sit down with the operators, AI founders, entrepreneurs, and business leaders who are reshaping what's possible in dentistry. If you want a smarter, scalable, future-proof practice, then this is the podcast for you. Today's guest is one of the most exciting emerging voices in UK dentistry, a second-year dental student at King's College London with a vision that stretches far beyond the surgery. He's the co-founder of The Young Dentist, a platform designed to bridge the gap between dental school and real-world practice. He's already won the Change Our City Challenge with an AI-powered health tech solution, held over 250 plus professional networking meetings, and is shaping a future where dentists don't just fill teeth. Welcome, Afeef.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randeep Singh. You're too kind, man. Too kind with the introduction. You humble me. Thank you so much.
It's amazing what you're doing, and I think our listeners are going to have a treat. We're going to get into the mindset of Gen Z dentists and give our listeners a perspective of where the industry is heading. So, Afeef, you've gone from a small village in northern England to one of the world's top-ranked dental schools, and while most students are focused just on passing their exams, you've already launched a podcast, built a digital platform, and worked on AI solutions. What made you decide to accelerate and not wait?
That's a great question, actually. So yeah, the small village in question, for anyone out there wondering, is called Healing, a very, very quiet, quaint village in northeast Lincolnshire, actually. So kind of the end of the train line. Not much happens there, unfortunately, but it's a really quiet place to grow up. That's kind of where I grew up, and I wasn't really exposed to much AI, technology, the innovative side of London that I'm exposed to now. But it was really good for my formative years to have that, grounding and basis in the countryside, as it were. So for many years, I was not driven towards being this outlier, as it were, in the entrepreneurial space. I was very, very diligent and very academic in my nature. So for a long time, I was very, very studious and spent a lot of time behind the books and got very good grades, much to my parents' satisfaction. But then around when I was 14, 15 years old, COVID was happening, everyone was locked down, and I had a lot of spare time. So I spent a lot of time looking at different philosophies and exploring different ways of thinking. And that really opened my eyes to maybe some philosophy that a 14-year-old kid shouldn't read. I read lots of Schopenhauer, lots of Nietzsche, lots of existentialism and nihilism, but also a lot of really good philosophy, which taught me a lot about how to view the world, such as, Stoicism, Aristotle's works, and also Islam, which really guided me to where I am today. So the point really I'm trying to make here is, in terms of how I got to where I am and all the things I do, I was very, very heavily actually guided and influenced by my way of thinking, my understanding of intention. I think that many people in the modern world don't really unify their will, what they want to do, with the agency, what they actually do. So my goal at that point became, rather than just doing academics for the sake of academics, like parents wanted me to, I had to think, and I figured out what can I actually do to kind of broaden that impact in a more large scale way. And that kind of got me into the whole entrepreneurship space, and I started off multiple ventures. My first business was actually when I was 14. I used to breed parrots, and since then I started a bunch of other things. I'm probably now to business number 6 now at the age of 19, and I failed a lot for sure, but it's also taught me a lot as well. So that's a bit of an overview of kind of how I got to where I am today. In regards to building a TYD and the podcast, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But one thing I think is worth highlighting here is the change between the village in Northern England to London. That's been also a very significantly positive change for myself. I think that anyone who kind of grows up in a rural part of the countryside, rural part of anywhere really, that change of the urban landscape is very welcome if you have that mindset of being someone who's quite forward thinking and quite innovative in nature. I think London has been very, very instrumental to what I've been able to achieve so far as well. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of my journey so far and how I got into this whole world of AI, tech, business, podcasting, and the like.
Fantastic. And I mean, that kind of vision so early really does set you apart. And speaking of vision, one of your first big entrepreneurial wins came through AI. You won the Change of Our City Challenge with MedEcho. Can you tell us what that solution addressed and how it shaped your belief in technology as a lever for change in dentistry?
Yeah, sure. So MedEcho was actually a very, very interesting concept. It was actually made by a few friends of mine. We entered a challenge run by KCL, the Entrepreneurship Institute. It was called Change in Our City Challenge, I think, or Change in the City Challenge. And the idea was to come up with kind of a way you could innovate or create a technological solution that addressed a big challenge that London faced essentially. So we were matched with the theme of healthcare, and we came up with a concept of MedEcho. So one common, critical time drain, as it were, in the NHS is clinical documentation and note taking. So what me and some of my friends who I was paired up with came up with was essentially an AI-powered clinical documentation solution, which really streamlined and cut down a lot of this note-taking process into a far more efficient way. Our calculation was we could save the NHS around NHS consultants and physicians around about 20% of their patient, or interaction and appointment times, and that by consequence could really save the NHS the £3-4 billion a year from just GPs alone. So that was our concept. It was initially a thing we won it on a local scale at KCL. We get I think 10 or 15 of the teams. Then me and a friend of mine called Naman, he was actually a postgraduate student doing accounting and finance, or doing business studies actually at King's. So he was in the business sphere. I was more dental related. We teamed together and applied for actually an award called Red Bull Startup Studios, like a competition across the UK. I think around about 4,000 people applied. We ended up getting to the top 8 in the final. Got to go to Milton Keynes, saw the F1 cars, and had a great time. But then unfortunately, we couldn't grab the top spot there as well. So that was a really great learning experience, kind of going down the journey of how you can bring technology and this concept of what you believe, this vision you have, into fruition. And a lot of pitching, and it taught me a lot about the ways people raise money, actually. So it was a really great experience.
Fantastic. No, I love the entrepreneurial spirit and going on that journey, and the fact that you learned so much along the way, and that just makes it so much more fulfilling. Now, let's talk a little bit about the young dentist. You co-created this at a time when most students are still adjusting to clinic life. What problem or gap were you trying to fill that just couldn't wait until after graduation?
Sure, I think it's really good if we link this nicely to the point about networking, right? And I spoke to many people before I got into university. So for some context, back when I was about 16, 17, I hopped on LinkedIn, I started building a bit of brand for myself, posting regularly, getting myself out there a bit, and kind of sharing my experiences as a student applicant into university and what I saw in the world around me. So, for example, one of my first posts for anyone who wants to go back to the archives was about Smile Direct Club, and they actually went bankrupt. Created a post on their bankruptcy, and I think it got like 20,000 impressions. And to me, that was insane. Sat in my little bedroom in our bungalow in Healing to reach 20,000 people around the world was insane. That was more people than the population of my whole village, right? So that really inspired me. Seeing the reach that LinkedIn could have taught me, or really showed me how much could be done if you put yourself out there, right? From then on, started a long chain of networking meetings and personal brand building. I'm blessed to have reached hundreds of thousands of people now across my posts, and also have a decent sized following of, I think, nearly 5,000 people, right? And that really blessed me with the ability to speak to people from all around the dental industry. People who were, dentists, dental lawyers, accountants, principals, brokers, people from all parts of the dental industry. And from that, I got a pretty holistic sentiment, pretty well-rounded viewpoint on what was actually happening on the ground in dentistry, right? And from that, I realized that I got into dental school. There's a big gap. That gap was really between what we've been taught in the curriculum and kind of the aspects that dental school has to teach us about, which of course are non-negotiable. In the people I've spoken to, I realized there were some common themes that they felt many people, when they graduated, were not fully up to scratch with, or were not fully competent with. But also, those same themes were for things that the exceptional dentists I spoke to were very, very good at. Things such as communication, or understanding how basic business principles work, or how to handle complaints, how to deliver an A-star patient experience, right? These components I felt were extremely important towards delivering a high quality of care, and more could be done to raise awareness around these points. As well as that, I saw there was a big gap between kind of what we were taught in dental school and the industry that we were going to enter, right? Now, in dental school, I feel like sometimes we're quite insulated and aren't really exposed to the wider industry, whether that be dental suppliers, whether it be equipment manufacturers or material suppliers, or even softwares that exist in the space, right? Not many students are fully aware of the wider landscape that exists outside of those four walls of the hospital. So I want to kind of change that and raise more awareness and help these brands actually get more awareness generated amongst that younger dental professional body. So that meant that the Young Dentist formed. The Young Dentist is essentially a platform you kind of big up and showcase, let's say, these pioneers at the forefront of change. And it's a really good way to have a podcast a bit like this one. We have a studio in central London, and then form a proper strategy of short form clips, which are then distributed across our various channels, right? And that meant we were able to get a wide spread of these highly engaging short form clips that people actually interacted with, right? All of my generation, the Gen Z as you call them, spend a lot of the time on social media, and unfortunately, we're sold to our whole lives. We very commonly shoved. We have very common, it's very common for us to have corporate messaging shoved down our throats, and it's very clear when someone's trying to sell something, right? And our goal with the TYD, the podcast, was not that. We wanted to have a subliminal way that our partners could message and reach these students, but also a highly entertaining and engaging format of study, right? And that's why if you look at any of our clips, they're very engaging and they're very catchy and they're edited in such a way people actually watch the whole clip, because attention spans are very short nowadays, and you need to get the most of that essentially. So that's how the podcast started. It's since grown into a bigger movement. You had our first event recently at King's, and the aim is to kind of expand our wings and do more events across the UK, and hopefully bring that messaging and that same vision overseas, which I'm sure we'll get into later on. But that's a bit of a lowdown on what TYD was, why it started, and kind of what it stands for. Crucially, it's to spearhead and bridge the gap between dental school and life at university for dental professionals between the ages of 18 and 34 or so, a class as young. Basically, anyone who's within 10 years after foundation year, and we can help support them become the best clinicians they want to be.
I think that's an amazing initiative, and I second that. I mean, I qualified in 09 from King's, and yeah, I mean, there's nothing on kind of business and entrepreneurship and connecting people to the wider ecosystem. And I think what I'm getting from this conversation is that dentistry is more than fillings and crowns. I mean, obviously that's the bedrock. Your patients are the bedrock, but it's an ecosystem waiting to be transformed. Looking back at your interviews and your events, what surprised you most about what young dentists are really hungry to learn?
I think there's a great appetite for young dentists from who I've spoken to learn more about technology. I think there is lots of new and exciting technology coming up in this space, and many clinicians and many young students want to utilize that to the best of their ability so they can then provide the best quality care possible, right? For example, one of our amazing partners, Dentally, we had them we had them as sponsors with the podcast and at our event. And what was very interesting is when we showed the second opinion feature, similar to the integration they had with Pearl, that was received very, very well by students in actual fact, and they were very keen to learn more about how it works, and gave them a demo, and it was really, really interesting to see how much of an appetite there really was for students to learn more about technology so they could integrate it into their own clinical workflows and the way they provide care as well. So if there was to be one thing I would highlight and point out, it would be the student sentiment towards upcoming technology in this space.
Fantastic. And I mean, you kind of preempted it a little bit, but if you were designing a course today, what's the first non-clinical subject you'd make compulsory in every dental school?
I think every single clinician in the country has, if you want to provide the best quality care possible, you have to have exceptional communication skills. Otherwise, the patient will not understand what you're about, and it'd be very difficult for you to progress as a clinician, in my opinion, because the best dentists I've also seen, you just happen to be the best communicator. I don't think that's a link. I don't think that's a coincidence. And the clear causal, relationship to be investigated there. I think the communication is non-negotiable, and I strongly believe that every single clinician, when they graduate, should have a strong basis in their clinical competence. Now, the way you teach that and the way that you kind of benchmark against that is a different conversation altogether. But I think that communication aspect should be taught. Not only the aspect of how to explain treatment plans, but also maybe some basic frameworks of ethical selling and how you can actually show patients the value of what you're offering. Because unfortunately, the stereotype among clinicians nowadays is that, for a long time actually, has been that we're trying to be money hungry, and we're trying to charge extortion fees for our patients, and that sentiment is spread and propagated to media and sentiment and a range of other things, of course. And the dentists are to blame for that, but to dispel those rumors about us also managing to provide a quality of care to people who value, I think ethical selling has to come into that, without, of course, being overbearing and of course being too forward in the way you present your treatment plans to monetize them too heavily. But I think that should be one thing regarding communication. And I also think the complaints handling should be another big thing that comes under the communication umbrella for me, because I think that's a very common thing that many students or many young dentists actually face when they graduate. In dental school, we can often be quite sheltered from that, and we might not get too many complaints because we're normally treating high needs patients. You don't have to pay for the treatment. When you have someone who has the expectation and monetary exchanges involved, I think complaints become far more commonplace, and finding a way to deal with those is also crucial. Having a proper complaints procedure and understanding how to interact with that is also crucial. And thirdly, I would say lastly, under the wider communication umbrella, I think having a close grip on how to de-escalate situations is also very integral to being a very good clinician, because it's almost an inevitability that you're going to have patients who will blow things out of proportion potentially, or will panic, or might not respond well to a certain treatment you're trying to deliver. And finding the way to calm yourself down and bring that down to a more amicable or professional level is definitely a skill that I think that we should master as clinicians. And I saw this very well actually before I applied to dental school. My work experience when a patient came in, I was actually shadowing a community dentist, and the patient came in who had previous, I think, dispositions towards showing emotion. I think they had some level of manic syndrome, or a clinical name for the condition I can't remember now. But they all of a sudden jumped out the chair whilst this dentist was in his mouth, and started running around and almost attacking the dentist, right? What really surprised me the most was how easily and how controlled the dentist was in their approach to calming that dentist patient down who had a clinical condition that made them act this way. But their way of calming them down and really de-escalating the situation exposed me to the true value and extent of which communication can be used effectively for de-escalation. So I think if I was to use one thing in a very long answer given there, if you sum that all up, I would say communication is integral in those three domains in particular. But as a whole, I think they should be taught as a primary non-clinical skill.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, yeah, I've been practicing for almost 15 years now, and yeah, I could say communication is, if not more important than the clinical work, at least on par with that, because it will really help you to, as you mentioned, de-escalate situations, and it's something that can't be outsourced, even with AI technology and something. I don't think communication should never be outsourced, and it's a key aspect. So I'm glad that you highlighted that from day one. And speaking of dental school, let's talk a little bit about your own experiences so far, because you're now in your second year at King's. What's been the biggest surprise about dental school so far? Something that you didn't expect?
Sure. So my first year actually was quite a big surprise. I entered dental school perhaps naively thinking I wouldn't be getting stuck in straight away and learning more about dentistry and dental terminology and the head and neck and the mouth and the like. But what ended up happening was in my first term or first couple of terms of first year, we were learning about the whole body. So we were learning about cardiovascular system, endocrine system, and I was really surprised by why that was, and why is a dental student having to learn about all these other systems that exist in the body, and what is the relevance of dentistry. And then I went away, did some research and read some articles, and realized how strong of a link there was between the oral and systemic, conditions that are in the body. And that gave me a far more appreciation for the value the dentists have. And it taught me a lot about actually how much of an impact we can have as clinicians, in diagnosing earlier on these clinical conditions that maybe might get missed by other health professionals. And the privilege we have of seeing these patients regularly, being able to screen for these other conditions. And that was really a surprise, but also welcoming, I think. And it gave me more appreciation for the role, for the role of a dentist really in the wider healthcare ecosystem.
No, fantastic. Yeah, I remember fondly learning the histology of the foot, and at the time I was like, well, that's the opposite end. But it's amazing when you're in practice and you're talking to patients, how many things you can spot, with people's feet, and then it ties in with the oral health and systemic diseases. So that's absolutely right. It definitely has a use. I'll tell you that. Do you think being a student right now in this kind of environment with tech and AI, do you think it gives you a unique advantage in seeing, where the industry could go next?
100%. I think the student card, as I call it, is a very, very useful one. It means you can get into certain rooms and get into some conversations that maybe a clinician or a graduated dentist might struggle with, because you can really tap into your curiosity as a dental student and explore a lot of what's out there in the wider dental world, right? I think as a student, you're also not tied down to certain softwares or certain technology that exists, because you're not using it in their practice, right? So you can go out and see from kind of a non-biased perspective what's really out there. I think that being a student has helped me significantly in my research and understanding of the wider dental landscape, especially in technology, because from my own experiences, the tech founders and the technology pioneers in dentistry are very, very open and receptive to conversation. And I think that being a student has really helped in my research and understanding what's happening in the wider world of dentistry. Just because I am a student and I can play that card as me being a curious, individual looking to learn more about the space, and that's not yet failed me. So I think 100% for sure, being a student is amazing, and I think it's very underrated. And many people use it as an excuse almost to not start because they're young and they wait till they're graduated. But I think that being a student is in no way a crutch. I mean, oftentimes it can be a help because it can open doors to you that otherwise might be more difficult, let's say, to access if you were graduated.
Fantastic. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure you hit follow, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your support and feedback helps us keep the great content coming on the TechDental Podcast, the UK's fastest growing platform dedicated to AI, business, and innovation in dentistry. I'm your host, Dr. Randeep, and until next time, be bold, keep learning, and scale with clarity. Scaling a business isn't a dream, it's a decision. This is the TechDental Podcast. And if you found value today, follow, share, and subscribe. This is the edge every dental leader needs.